Good morning and welcome to the Killik & Co market update. Inflation data has been moving markets this week. We've had the publication of the December data for both the UK and the US. Investors have been focusing closely on inflation data recently. In the US, because Trump's tariffs are expected to cause inflation if and when they happen, and in the UK because the autumn budget was thought to be inflationary. Lots of extra costs were piled onto employers, and that is likely to cause firms to push up prices and therefore cause inflation. As it turned out, the figures were better than expected. Here's the data over the last 10 years. We've got the UK in the green and the US in the pink. The US figure was 2.9%, which was actually slightly above the consensus expectations, but the core figure, which strips out food and energy prices, was lower than expected, and therefore US markets reacted well to the data. The figure for the UK was 2.5%, slightly below the 2.6% expected. One of the reasons was a drop in airline fares in December. UK equities reacted positively, but the consensus view is that the lower inflation number is likely a bit of a blip and that the numbers are likely to rise from here. This morning we also had the November growth data for the UK, which came in at 0.1%, slightly below expectations, but nevertheless it was good to see it in positive territory. This week we had a trading update from recruitment company Hays. It's always interesting to look at the data from recruitment companies because they can be a good bellwether for the wider economy. When the economy is doing well, firms tend to hire more. In its update, Hays said that its fee revenue for the permanent roles in the UK was down 19%, suggesting that firms have dialed back their hiring ambitions since the budget. On here we've got the share prices for Hays in the green and for competitor Robert Walters in the pink over 5 years. Both operate globally but with sizable allocations to the UK. Both have performed poorly since 2021, but there has been a noticeable further decline since the budget. This sort of anecdotal evidence is really helpful because there's always a bit of a delay with the official data for employment. The latest published data for the UK unemployment rate was 4.3%, but that was back in autumn 2024, so we haven't yet seen the impact of the budget. Unemployment has been gradually trending upwards since 2022, so we'll be looking at the next few data sets very closely. If firms are less keen to hire, then there won't be so much upward pressure on wage growth, as they won't be competing over candidates. Employers also tend to be less likely to try and move jobs when they perceive the economy to be weaker. Wage growth was still very much in positive territory when the autumn dataset was published, although it had declined over the previous 12 months, so this is another key measure that we'll be keeping a very close watch on. And lastly, there's been lots of focus on obesity drugs of late. The demand for these drugs has really taken off over the last couple of years, and this week there was a really good documentary about them on the BBC that lots of us have been watching. Eli Lilly is one of the big players in the industry. It makes an obesity drug called Mounjaro. Here's the 5-year share price chart in percentage terms. You can see it's up more than 400% since 2020. The shares did have a bit of a dip in October when the company missed its sales estimates, but a big part of the reason for that was that demand was so high that its existing manufacturing capacity couldn't keep up. The company then published a further trading update this week, and again that wasn't taken too well by the market and the stock dropped on the day. And this was despite the company saying it still expects a 32% increase in revenue from last year, and that just shows how high the expectations are for these companies. One bit of good news was that the company had experienced an increase in market share. Eli Lilly now has a 48.7% share of the obesity drugs market. The total addressable market for these drugs is certainly large. The latest data set from the World Health Organization suggests that 16% of adults in the world are obese, with a further 27% being overweight. The NHS has published separate figures for England, which show an obesity rate of 29%, with a further 35% being overweight. So please do give us a call for thoughts on this market and for the companies involved. Moving on to have a look at next week, it's a big one for the big mining companies, with results due out from BHP and Freeport-McMoRan. And we've also got results due out from Netflix. That's it from us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.